Шановні друзі, шановні колеги, я вітаю вас в нашій студії «Дієслово». Я вітаю на нашій програмі Міжнародній міждисциплінарній сертифікатній програмі з юдаїки. Я дуже вдячна пані Юлії, яка буде зараз перекладати ті кілька слів, які я б хотіла вам сказати.
I'm very glad to invite you to our today's event organized by Interdisciplinary Certificate Program in Jewry Studies. And I'm Julia Phil, and I will translate a little bit for you today.
Мені дуже приємно, що зараз ми продовжуємо серію лекцій англійською мовою. І я хочу представити вам нашого гостя, професора університету Упсала, пана Хейнса Вернера Венслера.
I'm very happy to introduce you a professor from Uppsala University, Heinz Werner Wessler.
В нього дуже цікава і дуже незвична для українських дослідників тема, яка стосується євреїв Індії.
He will give a speech on very interesting and very rare for Ukrainian scholars topic dedicated to Jews in India.
Мені дуже приємно привітати пана професора в нашій студії. Мені дуже приємно привітати пана професора на нашій сертифікатній програмі, і я з радістю передаю вам слово.
I'm very pleased to invite you to have you here, dear professor. And now I give the word to you. Thank you very much.
Yes, thanks very much. I'm very delighted about this invitation to speak to our colleagues and students from Kiev University, and from possibly also to some of my own students are also joining, which also makes me happy. And I'm very unfortunate that I have to speak in English, even though I very often, particularly in India, argue against the dominance of English. But we cannot avoid it. It's a great pleasure for me to be with you, really sincerely. We have met before in Vilnius, where we had chance for interaction. And I have, I'm not in Jewish studies, as you know. I'm in Indology. I'm an Indologist. I'm trained in classical Indology as well as modern Indology, and I have been professor in Uppsala since 2010. Uppsala is, basically my training was in Germany and in Switzerland. I'm a PhD from Zurich University a long time ago, and also studied a little bit in Delhi. And I'm talking from Uppsala, which is, well, a bit proud, maybe too proud, to be the Nordic country's oldest university from 1477, and we had the first Sanskrit teaching at this university in 1838, and the first professor of comparative Indo-European studies, and with a special focus on Sanskrit, in 1892. So since then we have a continual tradition, and with my predecessor William Smith, the focus changed from classical Indology to modern, what is sometimes called modern Indology. Nowadays the term South Asia Studies is also very much in fashion, but we call ourselves Indology still. We also have a full program in Sanskrit and in Hindi, plus introduction to Urdu we also have on an introductory level. And of course things are changing. It has also to do with the post-colonialism and with the change of, let's say, our relation to India and South Asia as a whole. That's one thing. But I came by chance to the Jewish studies in India. Basically, it was my own journey was through an author, namely Sheila Rohekar. I will come to her, who is a Hindi author, and she is a B'nai Israel, which I will introduce later, one of the Jewish groups in India. And Judaism is part of this of the, let's say, the landscape in India, which is basically usually when we talk about the multiculturalism and multi-religious atmosphere of India, we usually think about the so-called big religion, Hinduism, Islam, and then Christianity, and then a little bit of Buddhism and Parsi religion. Then there are Sikhs, mainly in the Punjab, but not only in the Punjab. There are Jains, and there have been more religions in India. The Ajivika religion was once strong, which has died out. And then the big question is the Adivasi religion, is this different from Hinduism or not? Dalit religions different from Hinduism or not? These are the discussion. What is Hinduism is not so easy to say. But very often it's forgotten that there is a small mosaic stone, which is Judaism. And they very often don't appear. We have here the numbers of religion, but these numbers are to be taken with cautiousness, particularly the number of Hindus. It depends how you define Hinduism. It's not so easy to define what Hinduism is. And there's, of course, a lot of syncretism in India and mixture of identities, which also makes India interesting. According to the last census, India used to have a census every 10 years. In 2021, there was no census because of the corona crisis, and it's still not yet done. But so the last census, which has a lot of data on Indian population, is from 2011. These data have to be interpreted with caution, including religion is also to be taken with caution. But according to the census, the number of Jews was 2011, 4,650. That's not much. It was much more after independence. The reason is that the great majority of Jews have made aliyah, they returned to Israel, so to say, or they emigrated to other countries. And as you can see, the community is largely concentrated in 4 states. Maharashtra, that's the Bnei Israel. And then there is Manipur and Mizoram. That's interesting because these are new groups that have discovered their Jewish identity only in recent decades, which is a big phenomenon. You have this also in Africa and other continents, that groups discover their Jewish identity. They're very often Christians who discover that they're in reality Jews. We also have these people in Afghanistan, Pakistan, which is also interesting. The Pathan, there's a certain group of Pathans who believe they are one of the lost tribes. I come to that. In Maharashtra, the Jews have now a Minorities Commission Act 2004, and that has also judicial consequences. It has consequences in education and many other things. There are some Jewish schools in India. So let's say, when you go into the history a little bit, as I said, there were many more. The importance is, of course, very obvious. Many Indians know that there were generals in the army, there were district magistrates, there were a lot of film, particularly female actresses, in a time when it was still for Hindu women difficult to play in films, particularly. So that's the thing. So it's a complex identity, different groups, diminishing numbers, but the importance is great. There's also great importance for India, as you know, this multi-religious atmosphere. For state ceremonies, well, it's very much discussed. What does secularism in India mean? As you know, it's not exactly the Weberian, Max Weber, the sociologist, secularism, which would be the desacralization of the public life and secularization. But Entzauberung der Welt, that's a German word, Entzauberung. Zauber would be magic, and Entzauber, demagicization of the world. But in India, it's more related to the idea of tolerance and the idea of living together of several religions. And in this state ceremonies, it is kind of enacted. For example, the cremation ceremony of Indira Gandhi and Rajiv Gandhi. It was important that there was a Jew. And we see here on the left, for example, we have the Buddhists, then we have the white clothes. I think that is meant to be a Jain. I'm not sure, the woman. And then the next is one with the kippah, that's the Jew, standing next to the Muslim. And they also have to appear in their traditional outfit, of course. So that's part of the, let's say, the state imaginary in India, that you need the Jew, so to say, for the state ceremonies. The number is not so important, but you need the Jew. And also when you have the state symbols together, you find the Magen David is part of it. It's very commonly together with the cross and the Dharma Chakra and the Om syllable and other things. So the Magen David is there. Yeah, as I spoke already about this idea of secularism as being living together of religions. There has been an effort first by left-wing people, then by the BJP, to explain secularism in the constitution, because it appears in the first verse of the preface of the Indian constitution that India is secularist. And there's this whole idea that it has to be explained what it means for India and for India in terms of the tolerance. And of course, it's always about the transfer of religions into nationalism. Nationalism being the conclusive umbrella over the different religions. And this is all with the idea of unity in diversity, which unity and diversity is true for any region in the world, but India is very specific in this. It's also related to the after independence, to this, or pre-independence. The British argument was always, there is not one nation in India, there are many nations, and we, the British colonizers, we keep them together. But the argument of the independence movement was always, no, it's diverse, but it's one nation. So anyway, nationalism plays a very important role. It's not so much seen in terms of a danger. As we all know, nationalism can be also something very destructive. That's not seen. So nationalism is still in Indian school books are full of nationalist terms that I would say that are a bit different in Europe. Of course, things are changing now. Maybe nationalism is returning, but in the European Union, maybe it is. We have these questions. I belong to this generation that is questioning themselves. Am I Swedish or am I European? That's not so easy. I mean, you can always give quick answers, but it's not so easy to answer to this question. But in India, it's very clear. So we have what in other terms, the Jews don't appear. Sometimes they do appear. They're the Hindus, Muslims, Christians, and others, but then we have, this is the idea of, that's in all Indian school books, the elephant. And the story, which is originally a Buddhist fable, where the members of different religions are taken to different parts of the elephant and they're blind. And then they start struggling. Who is this? And the one says it's like a tree stump, the elephant. The other says it's like leather. The other says it's like a big snake. And they start fighting. And so the problem with this imaginary is, of course, we don't, in the term of religions, we have only the historical religions. We don't know the transcendental religion, the elephant. We as human beings don't have access. We don't know. Even though, of course, in India, there's a strong idea that it's Vedanta, Advaita Vedanta. That's the transcendental religion. And all the other religions are explaining only parts of it. That's an undercurrent. Of course, I know it's a difficult subject to discuss, but there's a problem in this, because it would, in the end, say that Hinduism is there's a hierarchy then. That's now we come to Judaism. That's the famous Pardesi synagogue in Cochin, as you can see here. Indira Gandhi was there, and many politicians go there to appeal. But it's, so to say, not dangerous, because the Cochin Jews are so small in numbers now. There are very few left over. Most of them have left. But there's this famous inscription from 1344. Of course, Judaism is much older than 1344. Even there's, when you read this wonderful novel by Amitav Ghosh, it's a bit romantic in an antique land. You have these relationships from Egypt, from the Near East to India, and it was all nice, very nice, all kind of contact, the Jews particularly. Only when the bad Portuguese came, it was all destroyed. So I'm just a bit reducing it, but he is a little bit romantic. But it's a very lovely novel, and it gives you this impression that, in this Ginza in Cairo, there were a lot of Jewish manuscripts were found and deciphered, and there are also a lot of letters that were sent from India to Egypt. So that happened already in an early medieval time, very early. So there were these contacts. And of course, the Jews played an important role. You have also these modern nationalism, combination nationalism and religion. Of course, the Indian Jewry played an important role in the preparation of diplomatic relationship. Only in 1992, India started to have diplomatic relations. A bit late. In the famous United Nations decision on the two states, Palestine and Israel, in 1948, India voted against the state of India. It was the sister of Jawaharlal Nehru, who was then the United Nations ambassador of India. And only in it changed only later on. Since 1992, the diplomatic relationships. This is a Bnei Israel synagogue in Mumbai. As you can see, Pratnalay. Pratna, prayer, Pratnalay is a Sanskrit term for synagogue. And the Bnei Israel have this Indian identity. The Jewish status was also questioned. They were only in the early 1960s accepted by Israel as Jews. There's always this problem. It's the same with the Bnei Menashe and some other groups that are accepted only late. There's the famous, the Bnei Israel were in Maharashtra, a little bit in Mumbai, and in Gujarat a little bit. And the Baghdadi Jews who came in 17th century or late 18th century are mostly in Kolkata and Mumbai. But so Delhi didn't have a traditional Jewish group there. But very interesting, in the 90s, when India became independent, the place for the synagogue was given by the government. So that's about Indian secularism. That's very interesting. It's not so separated from religion, the state in India, as we believe. There are many examples of this kind. So the first Indian government gave the ground on Humayun Road, a very prominent address for it paid even part of the construction money that was essential. And it's still there. This synagogue that was constructed, I think, in the 1950s. And it's very important for the representative purposes of the state. I mean, we have a synagogue in Delhi. And there's also, of course, a community now. Now there's a female rabbi there. So it's a Reform parish. It's a female rabbi there now. You see her standing there. That was still some years ago when she was not yet rabbi. But now she's, I've heard this. Anyway, we have basically this, I mentioned this already, the three groups, the Bnei Israel, the Cochin Jews in the south, and the Baghdadi Jews, mostly in Kolkata. And Cochin Jews and Baghdadi Jews were accepted in Israel from the very beginning. Their Jewish status was clear. The Bnei Israel they were rediscovered in the late 18th and 19th, really only in the 19th century that they were Jewish. They were very close to being amalgamated as a caste in Hinduism. They were called the Telwalas, the Sanichar Telwalas, the Saturday oil pressers, which is, there's still very few of them are now oil pressers, but the Saturday, the importance of Shabbat was somehow, and they had lost knowledge of Hebrew, but they had still the memory of Elias having come to India. We come to that, and there are even some still existing remnants of Bnei Israel in Pakistan, by the way, as you can see here. There's a recent photography below there. So they're still a little bit there. And the Cochin Jews are there. And the Bnei Israel and the Cochin Jews, they refer also very much back to a very early arrival. So they argue that some argue after the destruction of the second temple, that would be after 70. Or some even argue after the destruction of the first temple even. So it's a shipwreck, and they managed to come on board, 7 families. And so that's a story that both the communities have. Saturday oil pressers, I said this already. And so most of them are unfortunately not any longer. Then there are these basically 2 groups, and the South Indian group and the Bnei Menashe. The Bnei Menashe are in the northeast, the Mizoram basically, or were in the northeast. And they were only some years ago accepted as being Jewish, and they in 2013, and later they were taken into Israel, what is called Aliyah. And many of them live now in the West Bank. So they were put in some places in the West Bank. And that's basically a tribal group that discovered its Jewish identity, and it goes through several steps. They were originally Christian, and or not originally, they had, of course, some, well, anyway, they made themselves more and more Jewish. They started Jewish learning, and they started rabbis, and there's certain Jewish groups who also helped them. They constructed synagogues, and they educated rabbis, and it was a longer process. And in 2013, they were accepted. It's now much more easy than it was 70 or 80 years ago to be accepted as a group in Israel as Jewish. There's a very nice film on the next year in Mumbai. It's on Aliyah, of course. This is a pun to next year in Jerusalem. And well, we don't show this now because of time constraints, but I can send the link later. So if you like to see, there's only the trailer. You can see the trailer. I think the film itself is also available, but you have to pay a little bit. Anyway, so that's there's a document. It's well-researched subject. It's not under-researched. There are a lot of people. There's now the groups in Israel are now very much investing into their own history. And there was, by the way, some years ago when there were some riots in Lot, you might have read this. So one synagogue was burned by Muslim groups. That was a Bnei Israel synagogue. So now they're very much into, very interesting, half Pakistani. Some people discover their Indian Jewish identity. One of the examples is the Sadia Shepherd. She is actually from Pakistani descent. And she found out only when she was an adult that her grandmother was a Bnei Israel. And then she wrote a book. Of course, it was a big discovery for her. She wrote this book, The Girl from Foreign. Very interesting. It's about the discovery. And there's also this key which she got. She got things from her grandmother. And then the grandmother, she thought she was Muslim, but she was not. And she never practiced Islam. But it's even translated into Hindi, as you can see on the right side, Videshi Kanya. So this book. And she wrote also another book, Footpaths in the Painted City. So she writes about India and Pakistan. She also made a film in search of the Bnei Israel, Sadia Shepherd. She's a journalist and an author and lives in the US. It's in English. Yeah, once again, the different groups you have here, and they came to several places. So nowadays, Lod is one of the places, Kiryat Biarid, Ramla, Kiryat Gat. And interestingly enough, as you might know, the Hebrew University in Jerusalem has an Indology, very respected Indology. Now there are considerable numbers of Indian Jewish young people who study. I mean, it has to do with identity questions, who study Indology in the Hebrew University. Yeah, so that's recent developments. Yeah, let us go back a little bit about Hinduism and Judaism. Of course, there is this problem that very often when you talk to Indians about Judaism, they have, let's say, a certain 19th century Christian view on Hinduism. So that is the one God is different from you, and all this Hindu ideas that the deeper dimension of things is the identity of the individual soul and the outside. So there's no you. This problem that God is not identical with yourself is a problem. Well, it's not a problem. It's hierarchically under the identity ideas. And Martin Buber wrote this book. He has this emphasis on God as you, as the other. And there was also, Martin Buber had interesting. He wrote to Mahatma Gandhi in the 1930s, and he argued that, how can German Jews, that was before the Holocaust, how can German Jews use non-violent means? It's not possible without leadership. very interesting arguments. And Mahatma Gandhi then, already in the 1930s, maybe there was something prophetic in it. He would say it might cost thousands of lives, but it's worth it. So I mean, he recommended German Jews, 300,000 should just, I don't know, sit in the streets and block Nazi, I don't know, anything, but they should do this active, what he called already then, active nonviolence. So it's not only nonviolence, it's active nonviolence. But I mean, it is a little bit naive. So Martin Buber's arguments was, I mean, it needs leadership. Without leadership, it doesn't work. Interesting argument. India had this leadership, of course. And he would say the Nazis would immediately eliminate the leadership. But Mahatma Gandhi had this big problem in understanding the Zionism then. And he has this idea, Zionism is in the heart and things like this, spiritualization. I mean, that's still a common argument. And that's why also Zionism, you find this with Mahatma Gandhi, also with many others. Even until today, that, I mean, the idea that a religion needs a certain space and it has to kind of occupy it, even eventually against the resistance of people who might be living there, is colonialism. So that's not only, so I think that the diplomatic relationships India and Israel started only in 1992 is not only with respect to the Muslim minority in India, 14%, but it's also this inside. I mean, this idea that God is something other than you, that's one thing. That's a lower form of religion. And the second is that the real Zion is in your heart, the spiritualization idea. So that the real place, Jerusalem, is not let's say, that's not an argument. And this third is the anti-colonialism that was, of course, there from the anti-colonialism in India. Nowadays, things are quickly changing in the last 10 years. Now you have a lot of Jewish, Hindu, interreligious dialogue things. Well, this is, by the way, very interesting. Herman Kallenbach. Herman Kallenbach did finance Mahatma Gandhi's Phoenix Farm in South Africa. He's also in the Attenborough film a little bit. He was actually from sorry for the place name. It's in Lithuania. It's a coastal town. It's very famous. With K. I was there. Very close to his town is very close to this town. Anyway, it's from now in Lithuania. Until 1918, it was part of Germany, East Prussia. So he's therefore often called the German Jew friend of Mahatma Gandhi in South Africa. And this German Jew, he was not a Zionist. He wanted to go with Mahatma Gandhi in 1914 to India, but he was, Gandhi from South Africa had first to go to Southampton, Great Britain. And there, this Kallenbachas, as he's called here on this statue, which is in Lithuania, Kallenbachas, is Kallenbach. He was interned because he was German. It was First World War started. Therefore, he could not go with Mahatma Gandhi to India. And there's even this allegation by David Lelyfield in his Gandhi biography that they had a homosexual relationship, but that's a stupid idea. It was not the case. So when Gandhi says, I love you, it's not, I mean, he had his style, Gandhi. It's another thing. Anyway, so Kallenbach in 1933 converted to Zionism. He was not a Zionist before, but when he saw the Nazis in Germany, he turned into a strong Zionist, and he was sent to Mahatma Gandhi Sevagram Ashram in the 1930s to explain Zionism to Mahatma Gandhi. And he stayed there for a couple of months, and he had a lot of talks with Mahatma Gandhi, but Gandhi didn't accept this. Very interesting story. There is a book on this written by Shimon, a researcher from Israel. Very interesting. He discovered all this argument because the Kallenbach archive is in Israel now. It's in Haifa, and actually it was there's still some research to be done. Anyway, so that's now India is very much with now these BJP and the RSS groups very much like this idea of I mean, the Jewish group who made identity politics, and they're anti-Muslim. That's also an important argument. And then they have very nice weapons. India wants the Iron Dome, of course. I mean, it's battle-proven weapons. And but it's very expensive, but India wants to have it. By the way, Pakistan also made advances, even though Pakistan doesn't have diplomatic relationships to India. So Modi was the first Indian prime minister who visited Israel, and there's this defense cooperation. But it also has to do with identity politics, and there are even documents on interreligious communication and the joint documents. By the way, this is the Magen David synagogue, wonderful synagogue in Mumbai, in the old fort, which is now beautifully restored, built with the money of David Sassoon, who was one of the rich ship company owner in Mumbai. He also, there's this David Sassoon library, which is on the other side of this. It's about 150 or 200 meters from the synagogue in Old Town. It's still there, David Sassoon Library. Also a very beautiful library. So that's maybe one of the most beautiful synagogues in India, the David Sassoon synagogue, Magen. And just a little bit on the Sassoon family here, Rothschild of these, but I have to look at the time. I won't go so much into details. So the Sassoons played a very important role. They also had this, it was a shipping company, and they were, by the way, also the providers of ice to India. So they sent opium to, well, for some time, early 19th century, opium to China, tea back to India, and it was also ice. So they went to China first and then to Alaska. You know, there were no fridges. They took ice from Alaska to India because the sahibs needed nimbu pani with ice bits in them. And there were these ice houses in India, the roundhouse. There's still one of them has survived in Chennai. It's protected now. It's round. And so I don't know, it just goes deep into the earth, and they put things on it, and they could maintain the ice until the hot Indian summer somehow and sell, you know, ice drinks and these things already in the middle of the 19th century. And so David Sassoon made a lot. Now Hindu-Jewish interreligious dialogue is blossoming because of this interest in identity politics and the anti-Muslim stance. It has to do with it. The second thing is that, of course, for some time, until let's say 20 years ago, interreligious dialogues was believed to be a Christian invention, and particularly Catholic Church. And now it's been taken, I mean, we do our own initiative without the Christians. So that's also a little bit. In America, there are a lot of groups now doing this, Hindu, Jewish. You see on the right side of the photo, Jonas Fischer, who was then the head rabbi. And on the left side, his name is Dayanand Saraswati, is the same name as the founder of the Arya Samaj. But he tried to organize Indian sadhus into a common organization and do this religious dialogue. However, the document is quite strange. When you show you only 2 of these lines from 2008. It says here, in keeping with the Delhi, that's an earlier declaration. The participants, it was made in Jerusalem. The participants reaffirmed their commitment to deepening their bilateral relationship, predicting the recognition of one supreme being. So it doesn't say one personal God. One supreme being is a bit more open. Creator and guide to the cosmos, shared values, whatever this means. And now it comes, similar historic experiences. So can you tell me what the similar historical experience of the Hindus and the Jews are? I think it's, it's this idea that Aurangzeb destroyed, or, they have this Holocaust of the Hindus. So find a lot of websites of this kind. And this was signed by Jonas Fischer. I don't know how he was ready to sign this. It's unbelievable. Similar historic experience. The parties are committed to learning about one another on the basis of respect for the particular identities of their respective communities and seeking through their bilateral relationship to be a blessing to all. That's wonderful. Now it comes. It is recognized that the one supreme being, this is this Indian problem, the personalized God and the non-personalized God. When you say one supreme being, you have a compromise formula, which is easier digestible for an Indian, for the Hindu side, both in its formless and manifest aspect. Oh, wow, formless and manifest, Nirgun Sagun. There's very Indian kind of tone under it, but that's still, okay, has been worshipped by Hindus over the millennia. Very interesting. It's monotheism in the end. That's what they want to say. Because the biggest problem of Judaism with Hinduism are 2 things. Polytheism, and the second is they pray to stones, to things that are made. But this explanation comes now. This does not mean that Hindus worship gods and idols. No idolatry in Hinduism, it's not. The Hindu relates to only this one supreme being when she prays to particular manifestation. That's a very interesting statement. Of course, you can discuss this. All Indian gods and all the temples, it's all just an image of the it's not the identical, it's not idolatry. But of course, this is a big issue for the Jewish. Here they're trying to put a formula together that would allow, let's say, joint kind of thing, Jewish Hindu, which seems to be so far away. Anyway, I go a little bit over this. Very interesting. Very interesting. But now you have all this kind of Hindu-Jewish Solidarity Day things. And very interesting, the Swami Nikalanand, and you have these converts who are following Indian traditions. That's also a very interesting development, which I find. Now, we had in Sweden, Göteborg, some 2 years back, a doctoral dissertation on the developments of these guru ashrams, in Rishikesh, you know, where the Beatles went in the 1960s. Now, a lot of these gurus are Westerners. So let's say 30 years ago, the students were Westerners and the guru himself was Indian. Now the gurus themselves are becoming, it's almost like a taking over. It's like a takeover of Rishikesh. I find a very interesting development. Here you see also a Westerner convert with a big beard and otherwise Hindu appearance. But we have this Hindu-Jewish Solidarity Day. The Jewish encounter with Hindus. So there are a lot of publications now on this. And here we have also Shalva Vail. She's probably the most prominent researcher and Nathan Katz, Jewish researchers on these traditions. Well, there are a lot of others. Yeah, this is about the Bollywood, where you don't see it all necessarily with the names. They very often take Muslim names or the earlier ones, or even Hindu names sometimes. But there are a lot of them, particularly female. Now I come to literature a little bit. Nissim Ezekiel is probably one of the most famous 20th century Indian poets in English. And of course, he's a Bnei Israel. He was in Mumbai, returnee, and well, I'm looking at the time. We cannot go so much into this, but it's about, maybe I will go. Yeah, he's maybe this is interesting. I went to Roman Catholic school, a mugging Jew among the wolves, you know, Christian. They told me that I had killed the Christ. That year I won the scripture prize. A Muslim sportsman boxed my ears. I grew in terror of the strong but undernourished Hindu lads. I heard of yoga and of Zen. Could I perhaps be rabbi saint? The more I searched, the less I found. So this is the typical style of Nissim Ezekiel, a Mumbai. He's usually, it's not the, let's say, these religious subjects come through all his poetry. He's usually taken as a modernist and as an atheist or agnostic and a poet of Mumbai. But you find these references to religion at quite a number of places. Also something like Psalm 151. As for those of you who know the Bible, there are only 150. So 151 is one more. And you have all these references. So he had a way of asking his questions, let's say, in a Jewish language, in a way. So you can, I don't think you can say he's just a secularist. That's what many Indians argue. Well, he's a secularist poet. In this context, it means he's not religious. You shouldn't identify him with a certain community, so to say. I don't buy this. But it's also an argument which is made of many others. Of course, you find the deeper layers of their interpretation of their questioning, their interpretation of reality, where these things play an important role. The sanskars, as you say in Hindi, or sanskara in Sanskrit. You know, the deeper levels of where your thinking, your reasoning, your questioning. And of course, it plays an important role. I will, as also reference to Bible, this starts off here with along deserted lanes and where the rivers flow in silence near the source or by a shore. This is a reference to, for those of you who know a little bit of English poetry, to William Blake. I wander through the chartered streets near where the chartered Thames does flow, etc. So it's a little bit along this line. And he comes then to the two last lines. By poets lost in crooked restless flight, the deaf can hear the blind recover sight. That's, of course, from the New Testament even. So you find this when you really read through him. Now I come to the Hindi issue. Meera Mahadevan, she was a South Indian, but she wrote in Hindi. She lived in Sevagram Ashram. She was a Gandayet, and she wrote this famous Apna Ghar. That was in the 1960s. It's like a chronicle of the Bnei Israel Jews. She was a Gandayat, and this is Sheila Rohekar, whom I mentioned before. She lives in Lucknow. Now she's married to a Hindu. She's a teacher of science. She was now retired at the college. And she has been writing Hindi for many years, published a lot of short stories in the big literary journals, in Heinz, etc., Kata Desh. And this is her second novel, Tawiz, which is basically on what now on 22nd, there's this Ayodhya temple, Ram Janmabhoomi temple will be open, big thing. But this is on the prehistory of the Rama temple. And it's a, Tawiz means amulet. It's very interesting because it's on a Hindu Muslim boy who seeks for his identity, becomes radicalized, and then he is killed in the Ayodhya demonstrations. It's a long story, and a lot of flashbacks and a little bit of magic realism also in it. And then he's killed by a police fire there, and then they find out when they wash him that he's circumcised, which is among his Hindu radicals a big thing. So now he's a Pakistani spy. And so they in the end they decide to let the dead body just disappear, so they don't go back to it any longer. So this story is the Tawi story. And then she wrote another novel, which is called Miss Samuel Ek Yahudi Gatha, Miss Samuel, a Jewish song. And it's here that she writes the first time on Judaism. By the way, here's an image of the family shipwreck after the temple destruction and how the first Jews reached India. That's the Bnei Israel story. And this novel, there's an English translation which will be hopefully published by Speaking Tiger within this year. Miss Samuel, a Jewish song. And here she puts this problem. I mean, that's when you're identified. People asked, what are you, Yehudi? What does this mean, Yehudi? Is this a caste or no? It's a religion. So that's Muslim, isn't it? And are you circumcised or not? So there's these questions and the problem, how she reacts to it. And a little bit questioning this whole setup of this Jews were never, let's say, they will never experience intolerance in India, which is not, which is to some extent true, but not completely true. So it's more complicated. So that's what the novel is about. And why people, I will have to go further. I don't want to be too long. Now, the last author that I would like to represent is Esther David, very interesting person. Her father was the founder of Ahmedabad Zoo. And that's why she is here. That's her own image. She is a girl with a leopard with her. And the Book of Esther, that's a kind of autobiography. And she also wrote this Shalom India Housing Society, very funny novel. You see Sheila Rohekar on the right side. Sorry, Esther David on the right side. Below. So she lived for a long time in France and in Israel, but then after some 15 years or so, returned to India. And she writes, my real aliyah is my return to India. She wrote also a book on Mahatma Gandhi, The Man with Enormous Wings. That's Mahatma Gandhi, who comes as an angel in the night to Israel and, sorry, to India, and is so, well, you don't really know his reactions, but we as observers of this Gandhi's coming see that a lot of things failed that Gandhi was dreaming of. And The World City is another novel that she wrote, which is translated into French, as you can see here. She lived in France for a while. I could give some examples of this syncretism and these identities. On the left side, let me start there. On page 108, I want to ask, you see this in the middle of the page about, I want to ask him from where he come and where to go. We do not know from where, but we know why. From sure death, expulsion, exile, homes broken, disrupted, burned from ruin to ruin with the hidden book. The hidden book is also part of the Bnei Israel story, that they saved one book, the Tanakh, the Old Testament. The book lost in the shipwreck. Eyes watching King Solomon's golden temple, the Exodus crossing the sea, the 10 lost tribes calling out to one another in lonely, faraway lands. A long journey into the dark night, following the Silk Road from Yemen, Rome, Spain, Navgaon, that's in the south of Mumbai. That's where a lot of Bnei Israel lived. Pressing oil from coconut under the sleepy eyes of the ox. Before Christ, after Christ, the story of exile. The book lost in the Arabian Sea. Closing in on the freedom of our minds, our breaths, our thoughts. Our prayer to the God without a face in the land of Ice. That I like. A prayer to the God without a face, that's a Jewish God, without a face, in the land of eyes. You know, Hinduism was sometimes described as a religion of seeing, of vision, while, I mean, it's a bit cliche, while Semitic religions are described as a religion of audition, of hearing. But of course, it's not really true. But of course, seeing plays an important role. Seeing the image of God is a blessing for a Hindu. Jerusalem with the golden stones, eyes swimming like fishes in the turquoise seas of Galilee. The story repeats itself. Farewell, leave everything and start all over again. Circumcise your sons, observe the Shabbat. Skins mingling, mixing, changing color. Graves on the shores of Navgaon. 6 couples that were saved from the shipwreck. 6 couples crouching together in the womb of the earth. Mysterious dwelling places of my ancestors, etc. Maybe I should add, yeah, and then this is, of course, I want to hide in Pratibha's temple, that's her Hindu friend, and offer lotuses to her god, just like the gopis, the girls from the village. Krishna, hide me under your mantle. I could be safe under the Mount Govardhan. So he has a Mount Govardhan, a small finger, Krishna, that he holds so easily with his little finger. Come what may, rain, storm, or lightning, I can huddle there with my eyes. Granny says, say the Shema Israel, the basic prayer. Listen, Israel, of Judaism, in Judaism. Say the Shema to drive away the bhuts, the bad spirits in your mind. Kiss, that's a Hindu word, of course, bhuts. Kiss the mezuzah, that's what is at the door of a Jewish house, when you enter the house. With a mark on the door, the bad spirits cannot enter. I do not have the courage to tell her that the scroll does not help. I need something more real, etc. So that's a very interesting kind of narrative that she bows together. That's Esther David. That's Roy Ben David, her father, who was the creator of the zoo in Ahmedabad. You see him on the right side. Okay, now really I have to finish. I know, I'm aware of that. Navraz Afridi, very interesting. He's born also mixed, but his father is basically, as the name says, Pathan, Pashto, Muslim, of course. And he has studied for some time at Tel Aviv University, and he goes very much into Judaism. So you have them at Presidency University in Kolkata and this new Jindal University, which is close to Delhi, where we also have Holocaust studies in India. And, you know, Holocaust is something which is very far away from Indian experiences. But some people work on this. And there's also this very good book by Vikram Chandra, on his aunt. He also has an understanding of this. But Navras Afridi is probably an important person in this. And in the US, you have this Nathan Katz, who has this Journal of Indo-Judaic Studies. That's one Nathan Katz sitting here. And this is a little bit on the groups in Israel who are working on these things. And there are also efforts now to start a museum, a proper museum in Israel. And yeah, these are some references. So it's not a badly researched, it's a well-researched thing. I mean, literature, not so much literature, but identity, basically. So few people have written about Esther David and Sheila Roker. Very few people have. I remember that was in the beginning when I read had written her Taviz. So the Miss Samuel had not yet been published. I was in a conference in Hebrew University, and nobody knew about Sheila. That was new. Even Shalva Veil didn't know. Now she's a little bit. It's now a little bit better. And I came only by chance to her. Okay, that's the end. There's this book, maybe the most recent publication, which I can recommend, by Nathan Katz, who is the editor of the Hindu-Jewish Hindu-Jewish Studies Bulletin. Jews and India, he says, not in India, and India. Mutual influences over 2 millennia, published in Manohar Publications. But I think I can finish with this last picture of the beautiful synagogue in Old Mumbai, the Knesset Eliyahu synagogue, which I recommend you to visit when you go there. Okay, let me stop there. There's time for questions and discussion. I should stop here. Yes.
Thank you very much, Professor, for your lecture. I would say that it was not easy to understand you a little bit. So I encourage participants just not to be afraid of asking questions. I mean that in case we didn't get something, we just can ask you. Okay?
Yeah, please.
Yeah, I have some questions, but first of all, I want to ask other participants. Maybe someone else wants to ask questions. Okay, then
There's Joachim who wants to ask a question.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Heinz, for an interesting lectures as always. And yeah, maybe the discussion should be heading somewhere else, but of course, considering my subject of Hindu nationalism, I do have some, well, maybe not a question, but maybe a reflection on the recent. What would you say? The recent Hindu nationalistic and nationalistic right in India and Israel relationship with the Jew and Hindu union. The Indians talking about, or the Hindu nationalists talking about the Hindu Holocaust, of course, referring to Aurangzeb and these are. But I think it's quite interesting that the BJP has kind of found some kind of equal ground while referring to disliking Muslims. When you have to realize that V.D. Savarkar, the founder of Hindutva, writing in his book about he identified the Indian Muslims as a potential traitorous people not to be trusted, and he quotes, like the Jews in Germany. And in the same year, M.S. Golwalkar, the Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh leader at the time, wrote that Germany is purging the country of the Semitic race. The Jews was so Hindustan में हमारे लिए सीखने और लाभ उठाने के लिए एक अच्छा सबक. It was a good lesson for the Hindustan to learn and profit by. So it's quite interesting to see the recent change in the attitude.
This is forgotten now. Savarkar, of course, he drew from anti-Semitism. That's clear. But now Savarkar is now a big hero, and he's believed to be a big thinker in modern intellectual history. And particularly, he was one of the few who had a sense for even the creation of Pakistan and Israel. But that this was not really meant as a compliment to Judaism. That's forgotten. Now, the BJP is very positive towards particularly the fight against Islam. That's true. And that's also kind of an undercurrent in this inter-religious dialogue, which is, I think, dangerous for this dialogue. It's not. When you want to go deeper, it doesn't work. And
no.
What I don't really get, I mean, I've talked to Jewish friends about this. How could Jonas Fischer sign this? But they say he was not a really intellectual person, and I think it needs. Let us see how things will develop in future. Maybe this shouldn't be taken that serious.
No, probably not. I just want to end by saying that even reading contemporary issues of the Hindu Vishwa, the Vishwa Hindu Parishad's Patrika, you will see a different kind of opinion against Jews and Christians. Now they're treating like an what would you say, an insignificant minority. So they will say that, hey, we treat our minorities good compared to we have no issues against minorities. I think they're trying to mirror Pakistan's stand on
Yeah, thank you. But there's another question. Hannah Nir,
yes, thank you very much. This was a very interesting lecture. My field of interest is contemporary Jewish life in Sweden, which is quite different, but also the same in many ways. And we actually have some Swedish Indian Jewish families here in Sweden as well.
Oh, mostly, I didn't know. I see.
Mostly Baghdadi Jews who came from Sweden, came to Sweden from the UK, mostly born in Mumbai. But that's a very, very small minority within the minority, I would say, but worth mentioning. And it's a bit related to my question as well.
I'd like to meet them on some occasion. If you
yes, we can. I can send you an email and we'll be in contact. No, my question regards mobility and globalization. And I wanted to ask you if there's any numbers, or if you have any idea of how the Jewish community in India looks today. Are we still talking about this groups of Bnei Menashe and Baghdadi Jews, or are there more like Western Jews moving for business opportunities, and like has Chabad taken over the more traditional communities there? And is there? I guess there's more diversity than maybe just like
these Chabad people. I don't think they have a relationship to these groups. They have another purpose in India. Why they open hostels and things like this. They want to reach out to the young Israelis who come to secularized Israelis who come to India, because India is one of the few places in Oriental countries where Israelis can go without problems. And they do incredible things. They go to the trekking tours for the Passover and things like this. And so they take helicopters to these bases. And but they are quite unrelated to the Indian Jewry, I think, as far as I've heard. And well, of course, they were also victims of this terrible terrorist attack in Mumbai, as you know. But anyway, these groups, I think, unfortunately, the number of Jews is very low now. It has gone down, and there's a strong, let's say, returnees are very few. Esther David is a big exception. And I'm not aware that they would intermarry so easily. I think that's is also true for, in general, it's very difficult from an Indian perspective to leave your community for marriage. You can do it. And of course, you say modernization and westernization, but it's still a big step. It's not impossible, but it needs effort. You have to convince your people, so to say, and you have to convince yourself. And you have to convince your neighbors, and it's a big thing. It's also part of this Miss Samuel book, where these intermarriages, and then the practical problems. Will the boys be circumcised, and what kind of festivals? And is religion only about festivals? Is there something else? What about values? And so it's complicated. I don't think in the tribal group, that is definitely a very isolated group. They maybe Baghdadi and traditionally the Baghdadi Jews were a bit higher than they looked down on the Bnei Israel. They didn't even accept them fully until, let's say, now it's different, of course, until some decades ago. And Cochin Jews are again different. But as I said, most of them are now in Israel. And of course, there it's easier to intermarry. That's not, it's another issue, another situation. What is such a pity in a way is that the Jewish identity group in India is, I mean, they will not completely disappear, but there will be only very few left over. And they're now, of course, because there are only very few, they intermarry with Hindus, like Sheila Roka is also married to a Hindu. So in the next generation, there's always a question, will it all be gone? Probably. In her case, her son is, I don't think he's particularly Jewish. I didn't ask really, but I've met the son. So I didn't observe anything. So that it's, of course, when you intermarry, it's nice to intermarry, that people intermarry, but the thing is that things are lost. It's particularly dangerous for the minorities intermarrying. For the dominating groups, it's not the danger, but for the smaller groups.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. I like this group. We have some people from Sweden, and there's one Israeli also among us, Aharon. It's great. I'm very happy to see you.
Yes, me too. Heinz, you mentioned some Bnei Israel in Pakistan.
Yes, they are kind of undercover. So there are several articles on Jews in Pakistan. There are some Pashtuns who, I mean, that's the 19th century thing. The rediscovery of Jewish identity, the lost tribes, 12 tribes. So the lost tribes, that's a big issue. So there are some hints that Pashtuns may be related, that you may relate to Jewish. I mean, there's something in the Pashtuni language, there's some customs, and also this Pashtun Wali, this certain kind of matrilinear element, which some of them relate to Jewish tradition. It's all very doubtful, but there are some people, this Navras Afridi, whom I mentioned, is also a little bit on this line. And there are some articles on Pashtuni Muslims who kind of rediscover their Jewish identity, and they're very serious in this. They do this over years. And they have, of course, it's clandestine. In Pakistan, you cannot go on the road and proclaim that you're Jewish. That's life-threatening. And then there are others who have married into, like the shepherd, which Umar mentioned. Her grandmother was married before 1947. And then she decided to stay in Karachi. And in the book, it's a bit the description that the couple discussed, should we stay in Pakistan or in India? And she was ready to give in. But the family accepted that she would not practice Islam. But of course, it would kind of die out with her. And now only the granddaughter in America rediscovers it. And of course, for her, it's a big thing. And then there is, in Pakistan, what did I want to say? There are some other people who have married to Muslims, and but it's a bit undercover. It's like I have read that even in Gaza you have married Jews who are married to Muslims, and there are these cases, but very few cases only. But in Pakistan, it's interesting. In the last years, there were discussions in the Dawn, for example, on Pakistan is a bit overcompensating. Let's say they're not fully respected in the Muslim world as an Arab state, for example. And they're a little bit overcompensating. So when you have anything Israeli in your passport or so, the visa or whatever stamp, you cannot enter Pakistan. When they discover it with entry point. But now they're kind of smoothing up a little bit. So there were discussions in Dawn. Maybe we should consider starting diplomatic relationship with Israel. These articles appeared. Of course, now after the 7th of October, it's again different. But I think once Saudi Arabia would establish a relationship, I think this discussion would come out in Pakistan also. And so, I mean, I've seen this even in Stockholm. We had this Arif Kisana, maybe you know him. He has this Pakistani group, and of course he has Swedish citizenship. But here's this Jaume Iqbal. We had this in November, and he invited me. I was there for the second time, and of course it was used as a forum to, as a pro-Palestine kind of forum. I mean, by some people, he also was. So in Zarbeq Alim, in the last poetry collection of Iqbal, you find one line on. The line is on if the. I mean, it was generally questioning Zionism. It was written in the 1930s. If the Jews can get the Zion, we should get Spain back. We means the Ummah, the Muslim. But it's 1930s, and I argued also. You see, this is if today had been Mohammed Iqbal, he would have said, I mean, shooting Israelis like this is exactly like shooting in the park. You know, have read this some years ago in the Peshawar school. The jihadis shot children, the school children and their teachers. It's about 150 died. It's about 6 or 7 years ago. He would definitely say that's not different. But, you know, this was this atmosphere. So what did I want to say? So, but this is on the surface. When you go deeper, I mean, it's not really worth to. I have always this question: how far can you go? How should you put this into the public, or how far should you just take it easy and let them? I mean, you can after another half an hour, you can get to more serious discussion. But I think Pakistan has this inferiority complex because they're not so full. Except I think it plays an important role. That's also why they want to Arabize the Urdu language so much. And, you know, you still say Khuda Hafiz any long in Pakistan, it's always Allah Hafiz. It's like a confession. When you say Khuda Hafiz, always say Allah Hafiz. It's nicer. Yeah, but anyway, things are, of course, always in a flow. It can be very different within 5 years, I believe, even 5 years. But right now, of course, there's this Pakistan solidarity thing. And I also always argue, okay, why not East Turkestan, for example? I mean, it's all wherever in the world in Muslim sufferers in Pakistani press, of course it turns out, but not East Turkestan, not China. Because Pakistan is I asked a senior journalist who did an interview with me on YouTube even. I mean, could you write something about solidarity with the East Turkestan Muslims? It's a big issue. Why doesn't it appear? I said, of course I could do it, but I would be thrown out of the redaction within 2 days. And I asked him, how do you know? My response was, how do you know 2 days? Why not 1 day? Why not 3 days? Then his response was, Heinz, believe me, I know how it works. It's 2 days. You know, that's about China. You know, Pakistan is all, I mean, I know it's not nice, but it's almost a vassal state of China nowadays. You know, that also, I mean, there's this Islamization is of course strong, but on the other hand, people are tired. The Jamaat Islami people, they don't have a good reputation in Pakistan, or at least not among intellectuals. And there's this China factor is very strong. It's very strong. And I think it's China also that makes whenever there's a crisis between India and Pakistan, the Chinese don't like this. It's not good for they know it's not. So they're taming down actually Pakistan. That's a good side of it. But so it's complex. Pakistan is, well, everything is complex anywhere in the world. Sorry, that was a bit too long as we came to other fields of things. Maybe some questions.
Can I ask?
Yes, please.
About the Menashe, these Jews from Mizoram and Manipur. How come that in the Tibetan tribes just claim themselves Jews? Was it just for upward mobility, or how come?
There's always the allegation that they want to emigrate to Israel, and that's why. But yeah, it's complex. You know, these groups, I mean, some time ago, Aharon sent me a video from Papua New Guinea. There's also a group, and there's some groups in Africa. You know, you know, it means a lot of energy. They work on their Jewish identity for decades. it's about learning not only some prayer or something, it's about learning a language and learning customs, and it's all kind of, you know, they put a lot of energy into this. So I wouldn't so much just easily say it's about upward mobility or so. It's, of course, it plays a role, but it's also, you know, some groups, they have, I'm not so, I don't know the details of this so much, but I have read a little bit about it. Of course, they had a close Bible reading. The Bible was introduced by Christian missionaries, and they came to conclusions by the Bible reading. They could relate things in the Old Testament to their own stories or their own traditions, be it narratives, be it festivals, be it something in the language. And that's a very serious identity quest behind it. So I think it's just too short to say it's about upward mobility or it's about Aliyah and nothing else. It's and what I also see that some of these groups in Israel, I've seen some days ago about these Bnei Menashe soldiers in Israeli defense forces, and it seems they're very serious in what they're doing, and so they're very actively trying to do constructing their identity, so to say, in part of the army, but it's also the cultural side, the religious side, and it's very, for them it's very serious. It's, I mean, I think it's very serious.
I see. So some ground is behind it, right?
Yeah. So there is this other group in South India. They're not yet accepted, but it could be. Of course, there are Jewish groups who send out people. As you just see in the chat box, it's Klaipeda, where you saw the Kallenbacher statues. Close to Klaipeda. It's not in Klaipeda, but close to Klaipeda. It's a smaller town. It's called Rinje or something like this with R, where the Kallenbacher statue was opened some years ago. And our friend Christina Luna from Vilnius danced her Indian dance there. So, but please do ask.
Thank you.
You mentioned that my English was not easily to understand because it's Indian English, or because because
I guess because the topic is quite new for us
okay.
here, and
Yeah.
I a little bit got acquainted with the topic before. That's why I got almost everything, but I guessed that someone just couldn't get everything. That's why I just encourage people not to be afraid to ask, free to ask questions.
Yeah.
Yeah. Some more questions? And okay, then another question. I guess that like the writings, the literature of Indian Jews in Aliyah, mostly women writings, right? Or I'm mistaken?
Yeah, that's true. I also observed this. That's an interesting question. I don't have a clear response to this. It may have to do with maybe, let's say, for men, it's another issue to become an author. There are other reasons to write, maybe, but cannot give a really clear answer to this. Maybe there's something like this. But you know, I cannot really give a conclusive answer. But it's true. It's women in this case.
So stereotypical, like women is the bearer of tradition, of identity, you know.
Yeah, I understand, but I'm not fully convinced that this is the reason. But no, better I don't give an answer now. Well, there are, of course, in India, there are a lot of men who write about Hindu identity or Muslim identity or whatever, and also questioning. And we had Nazim Ezekiel, who also has this identity question inbuilt in his poetry, as more as question than response. But But otherwise, it's Sheila Roykar. Yeah, that's true. Esther David and Shepard. Yeah. Maybe for her, it's perhaps also because she technically is a Jew, because it's a, you know, it's a matrilineal line in Judaism, which counts. So her grandmother, and if I remember correctly, it's her mother and then she. So when you discover, it's like all of a sudden you discover I'm a Jew. So that's the thing. But maybe it's this. So it's more drastic than if it goes through the male line, so to say. Maybe I have to think about it.
Like not measurable. I think you cannot like say
Yes.
exactly why is it so. Yeah. Please.
But please ask
who
questions
else want
or make
to
points.
ask? Yes,
Don't worry to be critical or say something. Question my points.
And okay, then another, maybe the last question. I think Bene Israel is the biggest Jewish community in India, right?
Yeah.
Maybe because Mumbai is quite a rich place to live. Why they didn't want to go to Aliyah like their compatriots from other parts of India?
Yeah, I mean, now we can now start a long discussion. What are the motives for emigration from India in general? And what are the motives of Bnei Israel in particular? I mean, in general, of course, there are push factors, there are pull factors, but it's still, that was also a subject, interestingly, in this conference in December where interestingly, Michel Danino, I don't know whether you know this name. He is a French Jew, by the way, a born French Jew, but he converted to Hinduism, kind of. And he took even Indian citizenship. He is one of the, now he's full in line with the BJP and RSS. But he said it's a problem that our young people emigrate so easily and they go to other countries, young people, intelligent people. But why do Indians still believe that it's better to immigrate? It has to do with the colonial experience. It has to do with a certain mistrust in India. And when you go to Delhi, you see all the traffic, the bad air, and so you can start to disbelieve in the future. Even though, of course, all the world tells you India is growing and it's becoming important and it's all fine and middle class is growing like hell and you can have servants and everything. Yeah, maybe things are changing a little bit, of course. People see advantages to stay in India. But let's say there's still more than in Europe. There's a certain positive value that is attached to immigration. That's one point. And it's still very much among young people. Whenever I give a lecture in Indian college, or there's always the question, how can we get to use grant for some study in, well, in this case, it's related to study, but it's also on immigration. And can you help us? And that's the second is, of course, and I think after independence, it was even stronger when the Bnei Israel emigrated. And now the second, I don't think it's discrimination experience at that stage. Now in the Northeast, I think the situation is a bit different because, as you know, it's a little bit more uncomfortable because there is the cookies and the Métis, you have read this, there were hundreds of people killed in recent weeks. Maybe this plays a role, a sense of insecurity in the Northeast. But it could also be, I think, basically the Aliyah with the Bnei Menashe, it's maybe there's some original religious search behind it. I mean, we discovered our Jewish identity. And of course, as Jews, we want to go to Israel. That also plays a role, I think. Yeah. Mm.
Should be.
Yeah.
Right.
So I think it's a mixture of several things. Mm.
Thank you.
Yes. Mm. Yes, please. Yeah, Hannah. Mm.
Yes, I was thinking, you talked about assimilation before, and we talked about intermarriage as well. And I wanted to ask you if you know anything about assimilation within the larger Jewish community in Israel when it comes to the Indian Jews making Aliyah. If there's any studies on whether these groups continue to practice their specific ways of Judaism, or if there's more assimilation into the sort of broader Israeliness. Or I guess there's some studies on similar groups, but larger, like Ethiopian Jews, for example. But are you aware if there's any?
Yeah, well, I'm not a specialist in this, but I've read only from Yulia Egorova and from Shalva Veil that there's still a sense of community there, but of course there's more intermarriage than in India. And of course, Israel has a very positive image of India, and there are a lot of Indian restaurants and a lot of, what I've heard, that a lot of them are driven by Indian Jews. And that's, but I don't know, maybe Aaron, maybe you can say something on this. Are they mixing up with the rest of the population, or are they more for themselves? I don't know.
At the beginning, they were more for themselves, but nowadays the tendency is over.
Yeah. I may say this here, you're married to Bnei Israel yourself.
Yes.
Пані Олено, як в нас з часом? Just I'm asking how much time do we have? Like,
Ну, ми можемо вже завершувати, я думаю, півтори години. Якщо немає більше питань?
Let it be few last questions, okay? And we are going to finish our meeting for today. Some other questions, please? Then I'm very thankful for this lecture, for this very elaborate, very new information for us.
Yes.
For us Ukrainians, and I guess for other guests.
But
thank you, Professor, for your presence here today.
Let us continue in some way. I'm so happy that I can be with you in Kiev. We see all these pictures, and we are informed about all this difficult situation and all this. So that makes me happy that I can be with you this evening.
We also are very, very happy, and we are really hoping that it's not the last time, right? We will continue our cooperation.
Yes.
We'll find more topics for discussion. Yeah. Then have a nice evening. Good night.
So have a good time.
Bye. Bye.
Namaskar. Namaskar.
Namaskar. Namaskar.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.